Dinner had always been the time Molly and I reconnected. It was our small ritual, a moment to pause from the day's chaos and share snippets of our lives. That night, though, something was different. The roast chicken sat untouched on Molly's plate, and she barely glanced up from her phone. Her fork rested idly on the edge of her plate while her thumbs danced across the screen with a kind of urgency I hadn't seen before. I tried to ignore it at first, focusing on the food. "You'll never guess what happened at work today," I started, hoping to pull her into a conversation. Molly hummed, an automatic response that didn't feel real, her eyes still glued to the phone. "Mark finally tried that thing I told him about." I trailed off when she giggled softly at something on her screen. Her laughter wasn't for me. I swallowed, setting my fork down and leaning back in my chair. "What's so funny?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She looked up then, a little startled, like she'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, nothing," she said quickly, a faint smile still lingering on her lips. "Just a work thing." The phone vibrated again, and I saw it just for a second. A name on the screen. "Josh." She turned the phone over, screen down, and pushed it a little closer to the edge of the table. "Sorry, it's just been a crazy day," she added, picking up her fork and stabbing at the chicken half-heartedly. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. "Crazy day, huh? And Josh makes it better with jokes." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing for the briefest moment before she recovered. "What? Oh no, it's just a work joke. You know, group chats and all that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. I nodded slowly, letting it go for now, but something about the way she moved, too casual, too eager to brush it off, nagged at me. Molly wasn't usually like this. We'd been married for 7 years, and while she'd always been a little guarded with her phone, it was never like this. There wasn't a wall between us before. Dinner passed in a strange quiet after that. Molly made a few half-hearted attempts at small talk, but it felt strained, like she was checking a box rather than engaging. She excused herself early, claiming she had emails to catch up on. I watched her leave, the phone still clutched in her hand. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it really was a work thing. Maybe Josh was just some harmless coworker. But as I cleared the plates and rinsed them in the sink, I couldn't help but replay the scene in my mind. The smile, the way she turned the phone over, the flicker of irritation when I mentioned his name. It was probably nothing. I was probably reading too much into it. And yet, as I stood there in the quiet kitchen, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The glow of the phone was what woke me. A soft, pale light cut through the darkness of the bedroom, illuminating Molly's side of the bed. At first, I thought it was just a notification, one of those harmless app pings that everyone gets. But then I caught the faint outline of words on the screen. My eyes adjusted and I froze. "I miss you. I left your scarf." I blinked, certain I was still half asleep. But no, the words were there, bold and unmistakable. The phone lay on the nightstand, angled slightly toward me as if taunting me. I glanced at Molly, her breathing deep and even, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. She was completely unaware. The message didn't add up. She told me earlier in the evening that she'd stopped for a quick coffee with a friend after her gym class. She'd even mentioned how great it was to catch up, dropping her usual anecdotes about the conversation. But now, staring at this message, my gut twisted. "I miss you" didn't sound like something a friend would say. And the scarf? Molly hadn't mentioned a scarf, nor had she come home with one. I reached out instinctively, my fingers hovering over the phone. It would only take a second to pick it up, swipe the screen, and see who had sent the message. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? Snooping through her phone would be an invasion of her privacy. But then again, wasn't this message already an invasion of our trust? I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the phone like it might reveal its secrets without my intervention. My hand trembled, caught between the urge to find out and the fear of what I might uncover. Finally, I pulled back. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, I made a silent promise to myself. I would pay closer attention. If there was something going on, I'd see the signs. Carefully, I shifted in bed, making sure not to disturb her. Molly stirred slightly but didn't wake, her face serene in the soft glow of the phone's light. I tried to convince myself that this could all be innocent, that there was an explanation I hadn't thought of. Maybe it was just a joke or a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Messages like that didn't come out of nowhere. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with possibilities. Molly had been acting differently, hadn't she? Distracted at dinner, secretive with her phone, and now this. It all pointed to something just out of reach, something she wasn't telling me. When the first rays of morning light spilled into the room, I felt like a man at the edge of a cliff. I had no proof, no answers, only questions that gnawed at me like a slow-burning fire. I decided then and there, I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to see more, to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I acted. I got out of bed quietly, leaving Molly to sleep. As I made coffee in the kitchen, the glow of the phone lingered in my mind, the words etched there like a warning. I miss you. I left your scarf. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Molly seemed cheerful, humming to herself as she got ready for the day. If anything, her demeanor only made me feel worse. It was too normal. She breezed into the kitchen, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. I'll probably be home late tonight. Spin class ends at 7, and I might grab dinner after. Sure, I said, keeping my tone casual as I buttered a piece of toast. I was too distracted to meet her eyes. I'd installed a GPS app on her phone months ago, back when we were planning a road trip and thought it would be fun to keep track of each other's locations. Molly never questioned it. She probably didn't even remember it was still active. When she left for work, I opened the app on my phone. Her dot blinked steadily, moving along the familiar route to her office. Nothing unusual. Yet, at 6:45 p.m., she sent me a quick text, heading to spin class. Don't wait up. I typed back a simple got it and waited. By 8:15 p.m., her location shifted, not to the gym or any restaurant we frequented, but to a bar 7 blocks from our house. My stomach tightened as I watched the dot stop moving. Molly, I muttered under my breath, my hands trembling. At 10:30 p.m., I told her I'd be working late, a lie that earned me a simple okay, see you tomorrow, in reply. No concern, no questions. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. The glow of her location on my phone was a beacon, a painful reminder of what I feared I might find. When I arrived, the bar was dimly lit, its neon sign flickering against the cold night air. Inside, the place was busy but not crowded. I kept my head down, scanning the room until I found her. Molly was seated at a small table near the back, and she wasn't alone. My heart felt like it stopped when I saw him. Late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He had the kind of confident ease that grated on me the moment I saw him. Josh. I didn't need an introduction to know. They were sitting too close. His hand rested lightly on hers, their fingers intertwined on the table. Molly's expression was soft, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. She was leaning toward him, her smile genuine and unguarded. Then it happened. He leaned in, his free hand brushing her cheek as he kissed her. She didn't pull away. She kissed him back. My chest constricted. Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, I thought I might lose control, storm over and confront them. But instead, I stood there, frozen, the world tilting beneath me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared earlier, the one I'd debated leaving at home. Inside was a letter I'd written after hours of agonizing thought. I hadn't known when or if I'd ever give it to her, but now, standing there, I knew it was time. I walked slowly to their table, my steps measured despite the turmoil inside me. Molly didn't notice me approach. She was too wrapped up in him, too consumed by the moment. I placed the envelope on the table in front of her. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, She looked like a stranger. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. Josh looked at me with a mixture of confusion and annoyance, his hand still on hers. I ignored him. Molly opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I turned and walked out of the bar, the cool night air hitting me like a punch as I stepped outside. I made it to my car before my legs gave out, and I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the empty street. My world wasn't just crumbling, it had already collapsed. Everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built with Molly, was a lie. The image of them together was seared into my mind, a scar I knew I'd carry forever. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to drive, unable to think, just breathing and trying to hold myself together. The sound of the door opening jolted me from the fog of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. 3:10 a.m. She was late even by her own casual standards. Her footsteps echoed through the quiet house, tentative at first, then steadier as she came into the living room. Molly froze when she saw me sitting there, the envelope in one hand, a half-empty glass of whiskey in the other. Her gym bag dangled from her shoulder, and she tried to compose herself, her face shifting from surprise to a carefully neutral expression. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice too casual, almost light, as if we just crossed paths in the morning, not in the middle of the night. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, my eyes locked on hers. The weight of my stare must have unsettled her because she shifted nervously, setting the bag down by the couch. I got caught up. Spin class ran late, and then I grabbed a bite with a couple of the girls. She smiled faintly, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. I stood slowly, the envelope still in my hand. She noticed it now, her eyes narrowing slightly as her brows furrowed. "What's that?" "Sit down, Molly," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her smile wavered. "Sam, it's late. Can this wait until—" "Sit down." The steel in my voice stopped her cold. For a second, she looked like she might argue. But then she exhaled sharply and sank into the armchair across from me, folding her arms. "What's going on?" she asked, feigning irritation. "Why are you being so dramatic?" I set the envelope on the coffee table between us, but I didn't sit back down. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the audio file I'd recorded earlier at the bar, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, light and airy, as if she hadn't a care in the world. "I can't wait to get out of here," she said, followed by her laughter, warm and unguarded, the kind of laugh she hadn't shared with me in a long time. Molly's face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "What is this?" she whispered. "You tell me," I said, my voice tight, because it sure as hell doesn't sound like spin class or grabbing a bite with the girls. She shook her head quickly, her eyes darting between me and the phone. "This is ridiculous, Sam. You're spying on me now? Is this what we've come to? Don't turn this around," I snapped, my anger finally breaking through the surface. "You lied, Molly. About tonight. About where you were. About him." She flinched at the word, her hands clenching into fists. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice rising. "Josh and I." "Josh," I interrupted. "So you admit it. You were with him." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her jaw tightening. "We're just friends," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Just friends." I repeated, my disbelief cutting like a blade. "Is that what you call holding hands? Kissing in a bar 7 blocks from our house? Laughing about how you can't wait to get out of here? Tell me, Molly, is that what friends do?" Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might break, like she might finally tell me the truth. But then her defenses kicked in, her expression hardening. "You've been distant," she said, her tone sharp, accusing. "Always working late, always stressed. Do you even remember the last time we had a real conversation? Sam, you're never here. You've been so wrapped up in your job that you barely even notice me anymore." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "So this is my fault now?" I asked, my voice cold. "You're blaming me for your lies? For sneaking around behind my back?" I'm not sneaking around, she shot back. Josh is just someone I can talk to, someone who listens. I didn't plan this, Sam. It just happened. And the scarf? I asked quietly. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face for just a moment before she recovered. What? The scarf, Molly. The one you left behind. The one in his message. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the armrests of the chair. It's nothing, she said quickly. I left it at the gym, that's all. You're reading too much into this. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You really think I'm that stupid, don't you? Sam, you're blowing this out of proportion, she said, standing now, her voice rising. Josh and I are just friends. I needed someone to talk to because you're never around. That's not an excuse, I said, my voice trembling with anger. If you had a problem with me, you should have talked to me, not him. Not like this. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue again. But then she turned away, her shoulders stiff. You're being paranoid, she muttered. I watched her walk toward the stairs, her steps heavy and deliberate. My hand clenched around the envelope on the table, the words inside now meaningless in the face of her blatant lies. She was right about one thing. Things hadn't been perfect. But this was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. And as I stared at her retreating figure, I felt the weight of our marriage crumbling around me. The shift began the morning after our confrontation. Though Molly didn't notice it right away, I acted like nothing was wrong, greeting her with a simple good morning as I poured coffee, my tone neutral, detached. She glanced at me warily, as though expecting the argument to carry over. But when I said nothing else, she seemed to relax. By the time she left for work, flashing a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes, my plan was already forming. If she wanted to play games, I'd play too. That evening, I came home later than usual. Molly was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice when I walked in. Normally, I'd offer some explanation, traffic, a late meeting, but not this time. How was your day? She asked casually, her tone light but with an edge I didn't miss. Fine, I replied, shrugging as I took off my jacket. She waited for more, but I didn't elaborate. Instead, I disappeared into the kitchen, grabbing a beer and heading upstairs without another word. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I started leaving the house in the evenings without explanation, coming home late enough that she was already in bed. When she asked where I'd been, I'd smile and say, Out. Out where? She pressed one night, her voice tight. Just out, I said, shrugging again. Why? Worried I'll see someone interesting. Her eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on the book she was pretending to read. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, but her discomfort was obvious. The first time I saw her try to check my phone, I almost laughed. I'd left it face down on the counter while I went to grab something from the garage. When I returned, she was standing nearby, her hand hovering over the screen like she was debating whether to risk it. Looking for something? I asked, my voice calm, almost amused. She jumped, pulling her hand back as if the phone had burned her. No, she said quickly, just moving it out of the way. Right? I said, picking it up and slipping it into my pocket. Her attempts to pry grew more desperate. I started taking phone calls in hushed tones, stepping out of the room or lowering my voice just enough to make her strain to listen. Once, I even caught her standing outside my office door, her shadow visible under the crack. Need something? I called out. The shadow froze, then disappeared. Moments later, she appeared in the hallway, her expression feigning innocence. Just heading to the kitchen, she said, avoiding my eyes. I could see the cracks forming in her composure. Molly had always been the one in control, the one with the upper hand. But now the balance was shifting, and she didn't know how to handle it. One evening, as I was putting on my coat, she blocked the door. Where are you going? She demanded, her voice sharper than usual. Out, I said, smiling faintly. Out where? I tilted my head, pretending to think. Nowhere in particular. Maybe I'll see someone interesting. Her face flushed, a mix of anger and panic flashing across her features. "This isn't funny, Sam. Who said I was joking?" I replied evenly, brushing past her. By the time I returned that night, the house was dark. Molly was in bed, her back to me, but I could tell she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was too uneven, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. The next morning, she tried a different tactic. Over breakfast, she asked, "Are you okay? You've been distant lately." "Have I?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Yes," she said, her voice softening. "Is something going on?" I shrugged, taking a sip of my coffee. "Not really." Her eyes searched mine, looking for answers, but I kept my expression unreadable. As the days went on, her anxiety grew. She started texting me more often during the day, her messages casual but clearly probing. "How's your day? When will you be home?" I kept my replies short, vague. "Busy. Late." The turning point came when she asked directly, "Are you seeing someone?" I raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed by her boldness. "Why would you ask that?" She flinched, realizing she'd overstepped. "You've just been different." I thought maybe. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. "What about you, Molly? Are you seeing someone?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. "That's not fair," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Neither is lying," I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. "Don't wait up." As I left the house, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I didn't want to be this person, but Molly had made it clear that she didn't respect me or the truth. If she thought she could manipulate me, she was wrong. Now it was her turn to wonder. 2 weeks. That was how long I let it drag out after the night at the bar. 2 weeks of strained silences, tense exchanges, and a hollow, suffocating atmosphere that clung to every room in the house. Neither of us said it, but we both knew this wasn't sustainable. It wasn't a life. On the 14th day, I decided it was time to end it. Molly was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when I entered, setting her phone down quickly like she was afraid of what I might see. "We need to talk," I said. Her shoulders tensed, but she nodded. "Okay." I gestured for her to sit at the table. She hesitated but obeyed, folding her hands in front of her like a child caught misbehaving. I took the seat across from her, the wood of the chair cool against my palms as I steadied myself. "This isn't working," I said, my voice calm but firm. Molly's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "What do you mean? We've been getting through it, haven't we?" "No," I said simply. "We're not getting through anything, and we're not going to. Molly, this marriage is over." Her breath caught, and for a moment, she just stared at me, as if I'd spoken in a language she couldn't understand. "You don't mean that," she said finally, her voice trembling.
"I do," he replied, metone unwavering.
"I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that what you did didn't destroy everything we had." Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "Sam, please. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Josh he was a mistake. A stupid, temporary mistake." "Temporary?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You call months of sneaking around, lying and gaslighting me temporary? Molly, you kissed him in public. You laughed with him about leaving me. You made me a joke to him, to both of you." Her tears spilled over now, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, Sam, I wasn't thinking. I was lonely." "That's not an excuse," I said, leaning forward. "If you were lonely, you could have come to me. You could have told me how you were feeling. Instead, you decided to lie and cheat. You destroyed the trust we built. And once that's gone, there's no getting it back." She reached across the table, grabbing my hand desperately. "But we can, Sam. We can start over. Go to counseling, take a trip, anything. We can fix this. Please, don't throw us away over one mistake." I pulled my hand back, the weight of her touch too much to bear. "I'm not the one who threw us away, Molly. You did that the moment you chose him." Her face crumpled, and she sobbed openly, her hands covering her face. For the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the life we'd built, the future we'd planned. But even that wasn't enough to make me stay. "I loved you," I said softly, standing from the table, "and I would have done anything for you. But you ended this marriage the moment you chose someone else over me." "Sam," she whispered, looking up at me through tear-streaked cheeks. "Please." I shook my head, turning away. "It's over, Molly." As I walked out of the kitchen, her sobs followed me, echoing through the quiet house. I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't relief, not yet. The wounds were too fresh for that. But it was the beginning of something new. A life without lies, without betrayal, without her. And for now, that was enough. The first morning after leaving Molly felt strange. The house was eerily quiet without the sound of her moving around, her voice filling the spaces between us. At first, I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee I'd made but hadn't touched. The weight of everything, her betrayal, the end of our marriage, still hung heavy in the air. But I had made my choice, and sitting in silence wouldn't bring me peace. That day, I decided to take my life back. I started small, clearing out the bedroom closet. Her clothes were gone, but her presence lingered in other ways. Notes she'd written, trinkets we'd picked up together, photos from happier times. At first, it was painful to touch these remnants of our shared life, but the more I threw away, the lighter I felt. One by one, I tossed it all into a box and carried it to the curb. As the garbage truck pulled away, I felt the faintest flicker of relief. Over the next few days, I began to fill my time. The gym became my sanctuary. I'd always found excuses to skip it before. Too tired, too busy. But now there was no reason to hold back. Lifting weights, running on the treadmill, and pushing myself harder than I thought possible became a way to channel my anger and frustration into something constructive. Photography was next. It had been years since I'd picked up a camera, but as I dusted off my old DSLR, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in a long time. I started going on walks around the neighborhood, capturing the little details I'd never noticed before. The way sunlight filtered through the trees, the peeling paint on an old fence, the laughter of kids playing in the park. Pottery came almost by accident. I passed a flyer for a beginner's class at the community center and thought, why not? My first attempts were clumsy and uneven, but there was something deeply satisfying about the tactile nature of it, shaping something with my own hands. It wasn't just hobbies that helped me rebuild. It was people. For years, I'd let friendships fade, always prioritizing work or my relationship. But now I reached out. I called old friends, arranged dinners, and made plans that didn't involve checking in with anyone else. One weekend, I packed a bag and hit the road for a 100-mile trip to visit my college buddies. We laughed like we were 20 again, swapping stories and cracking jokes late into the night. It reminded me of a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. A guy who could have fun without overthinking, who didn't carry the weight of betrayal on his shoulders. When I came back home, I felt lighter, freer. I blocked Molly's number soon after. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I'd thought about it for weeks, each call or text she sent chipping away at my resolve. Some were full of apologies, others were angry or desperate, but they all had one thing in common. They kept me tethered to a past I was determined to leave behind. The day I hit block, it felt like I was drawing a line in the sand. No more reliving the pain. No more wondering if she was truly sorry or just trying to ease her guilt. She became a ghost, a memory I was no longer willing to entertain. I threw away the last few things we'd shared. A coffee mug she'd bought for me, an old sweater I'd borrowed from her too many times to count. Each item that left the house was another step forward, another piece of the past I refused to carry anymore. For the first time in years, I began to feel like myself again. Not the man who had been betrayed or the one who had lived in her shadow, but the person I wanted to be, stronger, independent, and whole. One evening, as I stood on my porch with my camera in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, the kind of beauty that didn't need words. This was my life now, and for the first time in a long time I was grateful for it. The pottery class had become my refuge, a space where my mind could focus on the simple, repetitive task of shaping clay, leaving little room for the lingering ache of the past. I wasn't particularly good at it. My bowls were uneven, my vases wobbly, but it didn't matter. Every misshapen piece felt like progress, proof that I was rebuilding something, even if it wasn't perfect. That's where I met Jessica. It happened on a Wednesday evening, the kind of quiet midweek class where the hum of the wheel and the occasional clink of tools were the loudest sounds in the room. I was trying, and failing, to center my clay when a voice cut through my concentration. "Looks like your vase has other plans," she said, her tone warm and teasing. I glanced up, startled, to see the woman at the wheel next to mine. She had soft features, a radiant smile, and a streak of clay smeared across her cheek like she belonged in this moment more than anyone I'd ever seen. "Other plans?" I repeated, chuckling as I wiped my hands on my apron. "That's one way to put it. I think it's declaring independence." She laughed, a genuine sound that made the room feel a little brighter. "Happens to the best of us. I've been trying to make a mug for 3 weeks, and they all look like lopsided flower pots. Maybe you're onto something?" I offered, smiling back. "Flower pots are more useful anyway." She grinned and extended a hand, ignoring the clay smudges.
"I'm Jessica."
"Sam," I replied, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you, fellow struggling potter." For the rest of the class, our conversation flowed as easily as the clay slipping through our fingers. It started with light banter, our mutual frustration with pottery, the quirks of our instructor, and a shared appreciation for the cafe down the street. But as the weeks went on, our conversations deepened. I learned that Jessica was a nurse, working long shifts in a pediatric ward. She spoke about her job with a mix of exhaustion and pride, her eyes lighting up when she described the kids she cared for. "You'd think it'd get easier," she said one evening, shaping a bowl as she spoke. "Seeing them sick, struggling. But it doesn't. It's hard every time. The only thing that gets me through is knowing I'm helping them fight back." Her sincerity caught me off guard. Molly had always avoided serious topics, brushing off emotion as if it were something to be avoided. But Jessica leaned into it, her openness drawing me in. "What about you?" she asked one night, after I'd mentioned my interest in photography. "What do you love about it?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain something so deeply personal. "I guess it's about capturing a moment," I said finally. "The way the light hits a building at just the right angle, or the way someone's face changes when they're not trying to pose. Honest, I guess. Real." "That's beautiful," she said softly, and for a moment, her gaze lingered on mine. I found myself looking forward to the classes more and more, not just for the pottery but for her company. Jessica had a way of making everything feel easy, her laughter infectious and her presence calming. One evening, after class had ended, she stopped me as I was gathering my things. "Do you want to grab a coffee?" she asked, her smile tentative but hopeful. I hesitated for a split second, the remnants of my past whispering caution. But then I looked at her, at the lightness she brought into the room, and I felt something shift. "I'd like that," I said. We walked to the cafe down the street, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her childhood, growing up in a noisy house full of siblings, and I shared stories about the road trip I'd taken to see my college friends. For the first time in years, I felt completely at ease. Jessica didn't press about my past, and I didn't feel the need to explain it. With her, there was no heaviness, no unspoken tension. She was light, genuine, and utterly refreshing. As we sipped our coffee, she told me a story about a prank she'd pulled on her brothers when they were kids, laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. I laughed with her, not realizing until later that it was the first time I truly laughed like that in a long time. That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Jessica wasn't just a distraction or a new chapter. She was a reminder that life could be good again, that I didn't have to carry the weight of my past forever. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that I could move forward. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to.